everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis, and today with me, I have military.com reporter Tom Novelli with me. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm always excited to get the military.com people on so that I can always say, please bring back your comment section. It's the greatest comedy I've ever found online.
It's the Wild West.
Yeah,
Yeah,
also don't because it's also the most horrible place I've ever seen online. You know, sometimes things can be great and horrible at the same time.
absolutely.
So I brought you on. I wanted to bring you on because, and when this episode comes out, Nate and I will have already released our own kind of episode about our experiences with the VFW. And I saw this story that you posted, and I posted my own like tweet just saying, "Hey, give me, for veterans, our age, my age, and I'm 39. I'm not a young buck. I'm not, these 22, 23-year olds running around. I'm literally retired from the Army with 20 years of service. I served in Afghanistan in 2004, Iraq in 2009. And you have this story, and it really stood out to me because the headline is just VFW posts are dying. They need hesitant 9/11 vets to fill the void. And that is something that I have always kind of struggled with is these spaces for veterans that are not necessarily online. So I guess my first question for you is what led you to kind of running the story down?
Sure. So I've always had a fascination with, subcultures as a whole. I think subcultures are fascinating places where you can find stories. And so I know that, a place that every town, especially if you maybe grew up in like a rural area, perhaps, that is kind of a pinpoint in the community is your local VFW or American Legion Hall. So it started with just, I want to know more about the culture of VFW and American Legion halls. And in previous reporting jobs that I've held before military.com, I've reported on them and kind of the intersection of veterans culture. And it wasn't until, I started asking the question, why is the crowd so much older here? And, how are a lot of these places surviving just as we see younger generations of vets leave the service? Or how are they integrating into this community? Are they integrating into this community? The short answer was no. I mean, they're not really integrating at the same rate that maybe older generations of veterans did when they were leaving the service. But really, what I found in reporting out this story is that there is a stark generational divide for what a lot of veterans believe the VFW or American Legion should be. And that was really kind of what the intersection of this reporting was seeing older generations of veterans believing that these longstanding organizations should stand for one thing, and then younger generations of veterans finding that's just not the reality of what these places are.
Yeah. So, what is through your reporting, like, because I have an idea of what a VFW or an American Legion post is, but through your reporting, what is your takeaway? What is a VFW post for the people who are members of the VFW?
Sure. And I want to bring in the context that I am not a veteran. I'm just a journalist who found their way into military reporting. So I'm definitely speaking of it outside of the realm of military service. But the first time I ever went into a VFW, I thought, wow, look at this dive bar. It was a kind of your quintessential corner bar. I mean, I grew up, I was raised in the Midwest, and it reminded me a lot of the Knights of Columbus halls that my relatives would go to, or would remind me of some of those older organizations where it seemed like it just a place for older veterans to hang out. And then it wasn't until I started spending some time there that I realized that, the organization itself definitely is broader. I mean, the National VFW, the National American Legion, does a lot in terms of lobbying efforts, et cetera. And even these smaller posts, across America, they do various community service drives, blood drives, scholarship programs, things of that nature. But what kind of the bread and butter identity, if you will, of these posts is essentially here's a place where there's some affordable drinks. Maybe there's a fish fry on Friday. Maybe there's, a special dinner during the week. But it's a place where an older generation of veterans, mostly, I would say, at the oldest at this point, Korea, but predominantly Vietnam War veterans, hang out. talk about the latest, politics trends, complain about how they think the military is getting softer. And really, it's become a place that, skews towards white males predominantly, and doesn't seem to be very inclusive or necessarily progressive of trying to grow or change or expand their membership in some way. What I found was a pretty stagnant place overall. I mean, a place where there certainly were cheap drinks and some camaraderie, but no desire to expand that camaraderie to older generations of veterans, and really try to grow the organization in any way.
hmm and I believe that that's like my the VFW and American Legion experiences I have had are mostly from when I was much younger after my first deployment, when I was, the young 22-year-old who was, looking for a place to hang out and drink beer. But like it does like the VFW that I would have the VFW post that I would have joined was a small, like maybe 5 or 6 people who met once a month and had donuts and just like, bullshitted for a while. And the American Legion post that's near me is an actual bar, but like the moment I kind of step into it, it's a very hostile place. Like it's a hard place to break into. Like it's a you walk in and you're immediately an outsider, and there's just not like there's no reason for me to be like, oh well, I need to be a part of this. I need to break down these barriers. It's kind of like oh, this place doesn't want me. That's fine. You do what I did. I started a podcast. I have my own, kind of grouping of veterans and non-veterans, like a large, I would probably say half of our listeners are not veterans, never joined the military in any way, shape, or form. Um, but these places are just not they're not welcoming, and also like I have to look these things up. Like I didn't know that there's an American Legion a mile away from my house until I did some Google searching on my own and found it, and then physically went in there and was repulsed by it. Not like repulsed by myself, but repulsed by the people in there, because it's just an immediate. Everyone is just kind of I fucking you, right? Like, and that's the thing. You walk in and it's just like, oh shit, you guys don't want me here. And I've also been to a lot of VFWs that have had vendor events. My wife and I, like kind of on the side, we do crafty stuff and then we sell them at vendor events for going out to dinner money or whatever. And during those times, you always go to VFWs because they're cheap. Like a VFW post is a cheap hall to rent because it kind of looks like shit inside. It's dingy. It's the walls haven't been painted. It's got those low popcorn ceiling tile kind of things in there, and it just has that like it's not welcoming. It's not an open area. Like I don't know what exactly I'm looking for, but when I walk into a VFW or an American Legion, any of the ones that you would stereotypically think about, that's not what I want.
And I think you bring up a great point too, that many of them almost feel like they don't want to be found, right? I mean, in the age of the internet, when you have younger generations of veterans who maybe, they leave the service and they're looking for that sense of community, you're right. Many of them don't realize that there's a VFW or an American Legion right in their backyard, because many of these posts have very poorly run Facebook pages, if they have a Facebook page at all. Their website, you feel like, still runs on dial up internet potentially. There's just a lot of ways where they don't necessarily market themselves well. And in part, I think it's because that older generation of veteran that might flock to a VFW or American Legion post is not as interested in expanding that community, right? I mean, I think that's part of it as well. Is like, do they necessarily want to be found? And you're right. I think a lot of them find their lifeblood of being able to maintain, their various community service projects, and they're able to keep the lights on or the rent paid by doing very basic minimum tasks, whether that's just having cheap Budweisers during a happy hour, or being able to be a space for weddings or banquets, and basically being in a lot of rural communities the cheapest or sometimes even the only rental space available. So you're right. I feel like it's just this element of doing the very bare minimum for a lot of these posts are doing the bare minimum to stay alive or expand or grow or even be noticed.
hmm Yeah, and that does it does harken back. It's kind of a chicken and the egg. Like, is Are they not able to recruit people because they don't have younger people who can build a website, can run social media, and then, or is it that they you want people to do that, but you can't attract people to coming in because you just turned off by like, these old men don't know what they're doing, and that's not their fault. Like I'm not gonna sit here and shit talk on a bunch of old men who don't know how to build a website. Like that's not something that I would expect like every Vietnam veteran to be able to pick up and just be like, yeah, this is fine. I can run this through WordPress and set everything up, and we can do all of this and have more of a community outreach. You have the group that you want, but of course, the problem is that you're going to eventually just kind of be shooting yourself in the foot, because the old Korean war vets and Vietnam war vets are dying off because they are older. They are an elderly generation. There's, and once that happens, then what happens to your post? What if it's one of those, like, I understand that you want a place to hang out with all of your friends and everything, and I understand that you don't necessarily want, fresh new blood telling you how to do everything, but like this is the VFW isn't for you, Private Johnson of the Rakkasans in Korea. Like, it's for every veteran, and at least in theory, it's supposed to be. And this thread that I put out, and I am going to caveat real quick, put a little pin on this, because there are people who have been very well helped out by their VFWs or their American Legions. It is a post to post kind of thing. However, what I have found just through anecdotal evidence is that for the most part, these posts are not very welcoming. And in those instances, you have this thing that's like the American Legion or the VFW that is specifically for veterans, and it's supposed to be a resource and a place for them to go and congregate. And but it's not welcoming to them, and it feels like it kind of takes away from the mission. I think one of the big things that I saw was a lot of people discussing that the female veterans, women who were combat veterans who have joined the military, and try to join the VFW, and they say, "Oh, you can go join the women's auxiliary." And it's like, "But I'm a veteran of a foreign war. This is the VFW." It's like, "Yes, but this is for women. This is for men only." And like, if you can't even get over like the gender gap of men and women, women combat veterans who served, because like women served throughout the military history, especially while these gentlemen were in. Maybe not at the levels that we have today, certainly not in the combat levels that we have today, but they still served. But if you can't even jump over that gender gap, like, how is a gay or lesbian veteran or a transgender veteran or anybody who has at some point in time signed on the dotted line and gone and gotten shot at by whoever, and now is no longer is not welcome in these spaces, and that's where these things are going to die off. And it's disheartening, really, that nobody wants to, that some of these places just don't really want to expand themselves, I guess.
Well, and it's this interesting tug of war that exists too. I mean, now we see the national organizations, the big VFW, big American Legion, if you will, that are having this vision of, and knowing that they're failing by recruiting younger generations of veterans, and they want that to change. But the problem with that as well is that there is so much difference, and I appreciate your good disclaimer there too, that yes, every post is different. There are posts that are very welcoming. There are posts that are very isolating. And I think that's the really tough part of this, right? Is that the national organization can do as much PR work as they want to do, and it can be in subtle or strong ways, but ultimately you have to change thousands of essentially subcultures that exist in each one of these posts. But what my story tried to speak to was the larger themes that we saw, and I think you did a really good job of kind of touching on them as well. I mean, I spoke with an Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran for the story, who had a positive, view of the VFW when he was deployed over in Korea. And he would go there, and it was his way of finding a sense of community in a foreign country, and it was great. But when he got back, he found that like the domestic VFW posts were incredibly unwelcoming. And to your point as well, right? He told us that it was very clicky, that they're talking about their political views, many of them which are not welcoming to a more modern generation of veteran, right? I mean, there's a lot of repeating Fox News talking points, for example, and that ultimately what modern veterans want from an organization and from really a sense of community is something that goes beyond just sitting inside a dark and, kind of smelly bar from time to time and just, talking about those things. And again, also to your point that, um, yeah, I mean, I have written many stories in my journalism career. I don't think I've ever written one where I've received so much reader mail. The amount of emails I've gotten this past week were wild from people relaying mostly negative experiences they had at their local VFW or an American Legion post, and a lot of them were women who said that they were completely brushed off by the organization, saying, "Hey, we don't want you as a member, but why don't you go ahead and join the auxiliary, which is essentially for family, friends, those who may have not had service, but essentially are kind of the supporting wing to every VFW post."
Yeah,
Um,
it's
yeah,
the you can't join us because you're not a veteran of a foreign war, but we still want you to be involved. So we have this thing, which is of course insane to say to somebody who literally is a veteran of a foreign war.
right. Somebody who makes the membership requirements, served honorably, and then to tell them, "Hey, why don't you sit in the background?" That really is a shame, right? And also the worst PR you could ask for for any organization. I mean, I think what matters to any organization is how is it perceived through word of mouth. And what I've learned this past week, well, while reporting out the story, but also just from all the reader mail I received, it's bad. I would go so far to say that it is very bad and it is very negative because there has been a closed-minded mentality towards expanding membership to
Hmm.
a diverse group of veterans.
Yeah, I've actually spoken to a couple of local veterans because I'm it's trying to sort to suss it out, like what exactly is the target group that you want to be going for. Like I don't think a VFW or American Legion is really going to attract like a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old because they have better places to go drink. But like that older, like me, I'm 39 years old, I'm almost 40, but I'm a millennial. I should be, these are the things that I should be getting involved in. But like I don't want to go to a bar. I don't drink. Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, well, you can go and not drink, but I don't want to go to a bar. And also a lot of, I think like, now, after, in the last 20 years, we have such a bigger, a broader scope and idea of like post traumatic stress disorder and treatments for it and things like that, that like a bar to hang out in is not a great idea for most combat vets. Like, a lot of people are already fucking self-medicating themselves at home with alcohol or with drugs of some kind. Having a communal place to do that is not necessarily a better idea. Like, sure, you can get drunk with your friends instead of drunk at home alone. You're still an alcoholic. You're still dealing with these things in a way that's not supposed to be done. And as we said, every VFW post is different, so how are they all going to deal with something like that? Are they going to deal with it? I mean, if going basing myself off of how the military deals with PTSD over the last 20 years, a lot of times they're just going to kind of sweep it under the rug and shrug it off and move on, and people aren't going to get the help that they need. So like I just feel like the concept of as you said, what we think of as a VFW through word of mouth are these halls that are cheap to rent, that some of us went to go watch punk shows in the basements of, because when you've got a bunch of teenage kids and punk bands, that's what you can afford. And and that's it. Like that's why you would go there, is for cheap beer, which also, even if I did still drink, I can afford real beer. I'm almost 40. It's okay. Like, even when I was drinking, I was buying nicer beer than like a Coors Light or a or Milwaukee's Best or something. So it feels like there was this void that was being filled, but the void is still there. Like, where do veterans congregate now? Where do we go to? Like, I have a podcast because I really had nowhere else to go. I had nobody else to talk to. Like, this podcast has been like my military therapy for the last 6 years, being able to talk about these things and discuss them and bring them out into the light and everything. But, where does your average 9/11, post 9/11 veteran, where do they go? And that's the question. Like, do we in a COVID, in post COVID, or still like tail end of COVID, or whatever is going to happen the next couple of years? Do we need to have these congregating spaces? Do we want to be face to face? And I do think that that's important. Like, but there's the problem is the only places that have a place that you can get together are these ancient, via veteran service organizations that don't seem to want, like, they see, like your thing says, like they want post 9/11 uh, veterans, but do they? Is the
Mhm.
question, and it really feels like no sometimes.
Right, 100%. I think that, national organization realizes, yes. I mean, when you just look at the membership numbers, I mean, they're dwindling significantly. I mean, we're talking, I mean, almost for the VFW alone, like the membership being cut nearly in half over the course of a generation. I mean, that's an alarming rate. And, to your point as well, like where are Iraq and Afghanistan veterans finding community? I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think for one, like let's say even if you did want to spend time at a bar, we find that most Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, to your point, they want better beer, they want better music. They would rather meet with people in maybe a more established place. I mean, you're going to go downtown, right? You're going to go somewhere else. You're going to go to a place that's maybe just opened up and maybe serves better food. And I mean, you're going to find community, at least in that sense, and you'll probably connect with other veterans online and then maybe meet them in person, at a different place. So, I mean, there's things like that. And I mean, also, I feel like some of the solutions that the VFW and American Legion have kind of kicked around as a way to attract these veterans also is not a perfect solution because it really also only attracts a small portion of those veterans too. One thing that had been talked about for years was essentially trying to make the spaces more family friendly, which of course alienates the older veterans who say, no, I just want to come here and listen to my Jimmy Buffett cover band and drink my Coors Light away from people, to making it a place where, like, oh, maybe there's a playground, maybe there's more family friendly events where these younger generations of veterans can bring their kids and stuff. And that's not a perfect solution either. I mean, because again, veterans are finding other community, in more family friendly places elsewhere.
But let's be honest, a bar with a playground that I can drop my kid off at would have been phenomenal back when I was drinking. So, it's just like, hey, I'm going to go to the bar. You go out, like, you just make an enclosed playground outside so they can't escape, and you're good to go.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's just like the McDonald's Playscape, but instead of getting a McDouble, I'm getting two Coors Lights essentially.
Exactly. Two
So
beers doesn't count, man. That's not drunk. It's fine.
that's right. But I think again to your point as well that veterans also, this younger generation of veteran has found other ways to uh, and also to your point, recognize that sometimes alcohol is a stumbling block in their recovery from their service as well too. I mean, I think that's the other thing, is that a bar culture maybe is not perfect for every veteran who wants to find a sense of community. So I think what we're seeing a lot too from this younger generation of veteran is more creative ways of congregating, whether that is with various, running or cycling, physical obstacle challenges, things like that, where they're finding their own groups of people. I know here in South Carolina, where I'm based, I mean, there's a huge group of veterans that goes sailing, they go kayaking, and stuff like that. So I think they're finding more active ways to connect with each other. And also, I think one thing that was kind of the running through line in the article was that this problem is not new. I think that's the thing. The problem has gotten worse, but it's not new. And I think to highlight that, there was a Wall Street Journal article that published back in, I think it was like the 70s. And essentially it said that, the American Legion was going to fade away because not enough Vietnam veterans were joining the organization at the same rate as those from World War II. It had always been this closed off thing where, and I'd gotten reader mail about this week, where World War II veterans were alienating Vietnam vets, feeling like their conflict wasn't as noble or as distinguished as the conflict they went through. And so, we saw that divide, and really, it's kind of this secular problem where then when the older generation of vets started to move on, Vietnam vets trickled their way in, and then they're closed minded towards, the future generation of veteran and such. So it's been this long-standing issue that we've seen for a really long time. And the American Legion likes to point to that 1972 Wall Street Journal article as an example of like, well, they said we were fading away then, and we're still here. I mean, yes, their membership rates have been slashed in huge fashions and numbers, but I think what that ignores, though, is to say like, well, people said we were going to fade away before, and we're still here. Is well, how are you evolving? How are you growing? How are you fixing the looming problem of making sure that you're still attractive to the next generation of veteran? And we're seeing the same things play out now with Vietnam veterans now alienating Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans.
Hmm. Yeah, and definitely, I've heard more than once the you go in and you're told, well, your war wasn't as dangerous or violent as mine, and that's why I'm more of a veteran than you. And it's like, look, man, like I like me personally, I was public affairs, so nobody like I was never like frontline kind of soldier. Sure, I was, I did a few things in some kind of hairy places, but I wasn't a frontline infantry guy. But like also I've always been a like, look, man, you served. Like you put yourself out there to go through that. And you didn't, which is cool, which is great because it sounds like it fucking sucks. But it's you're still there. You were still kind of, a part of that situation. And to your point, like where is the evolution? And I know you mentioned, because I've talked to a few other people about like veteran running groups or veteran sailing and kayaking, but like I don't want to do those things. I don't want to go running with a bunch of veterans. I don't want to kayak or sail. I don't want to, like there's all kinds of great groups that are around a an activity or something like that. And I think those are fantastic. Like I'm not taking away from those things, but not every veteran can run. Not every veteran can or wants to sail or kayak. Not every veteran can be a part of these very physical activities. And I believe that and again, I'm not against these things existing, but I do think that when they are created, it's created by one person who says, I want to do this. I want to go running, and I want to go running with other veterans. So I'm going to start a thing that is going to be running for veterans. And you have this like good feeling because like I'm doing this thing with all these veterans, but like again, you're excluding so many people. Like all these other veterans are going to be excluded from something like this because they don't have that. And the VFW and the American Legion, in theory, is that place that is going to involve everybody. Anyone can come, anyone can be a part of this. Within the parameters of like VFW have to have deployed. American Legion, I believe it's 1 day of active duty. Any 1 day of active duty and honorable discharge, you can be in the American Legion. Good luck to those of you who got medically discharged 1 week into basic training because they're really going to give you shit on that one. But you count as an American Legion, and that's fine. And I 100% agree to that because again, you signed up on the dotted line to go get shot at. Whether I think that was a smart idea for you or not, you still are a part of that community and that society. So, and so there are these great things, but we need something for everybody. We need we need the VFW, we need the American Legion to be there so that it can encompass everybody. And like currently, we're the 9/11 post 9/11 veterans are very fractured. And that's just because we don't. People create their own spaces. People create their own businesses. They find ways to do it, but that is a very low rate of success, right? Like not every veteran can do this. Not every veteran can run a podcast. Like it's not hard, but like not everybody has the want or the will or the desire to do something like this. So what do we have for these people? And I'm curious. I know you've said you got a lot of emails from readers, and you've talked to a lot of post 9/11 veterans. Have any of them told you what they wish the VFW would be, like the changes that they would make to entice them to join?
Sure. I will say the kind of the immediate reaction I've gotten from a lot of vets, and I remember, just in a Twitter thread about this as well. So many younger veterans are just like, their knee jerk reaction was like, "We'll let it die. Let them die. Like we'll figure it out. I mean, if they don't want to change, if they don't want to evolve, then we'll move on." Which is certainly kind of like the quick like internet outrage take to make, right? It's like, well, if they don't want to change, forget about them. But from what I've received in reader mail and speaking with some other younger generations of veterans about this, they said, they want to see just in the smallest way. I mean, they just want to see some kindness. I mean, they want to be able to walk in and kind of like you pointed out at, as we started our conversation, we want to walk in and feel like you don't have a target on your back and that everybody's just like staring at you because you're a younger generation of veteran. Like they need to be welcoming, right? I mean, they're not going to change having a younger generation of veteran in there. The whole point is they're not going to come in there and point at some World War II vet or Vietnam vet or Korea vet and be like, you know, what you did was wrong. I mean, there's the common thread of being a veteran, of having that military service. So I think they all want to share in that. They're not opposed to having older people share the same space with them or anything like that. Like they want that sense of community. So I think the thing that I've seen, at least in conversations and in reader mail, was just this desire for them to at least like open their arms and say like, hey, we want to hear about your experiences. We want to hear what you need from us. They want to have some input to that. A big part of that too was being maybe a little bit more family friendly, being a little bit more active. But really, what it all kind of distilled down and boiled down to in its simplest form was, we want to feel like we're wanted. We want to feel like you care about it. And it's funny because every time I talk with a Vietnam veteran, let's say at a VFW, they all acknowledge that their military service was nothing compared to those who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially those who went back for multiple deployments. Who it took much more of a mental toll on them to, go deploy, come back home, go back and deploy. And, for many of them, they did their 2 years or they were, overseas for a bit and then they came right back home and then they were done, And so kind of the way that the military has approached deployments too has changed as well. And therefore the stresses and the trauma and such from the younger generation of veterans is very different compared to those of older generations of veterans. And, I think they acknowledge that there needs to be a dialogue. Like they are like, it's funny because, the several posts that I visited and talked with veterans about for the story, they all acknowledged like, wow, like having to deploy multiple times, that's crazy. And that seems like a lot. And they probably need a place to blow off some steam and just like, talk it out, maybe grab a drink, etc. But, to your point earlier, not a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan war vets feel like the most productive place to have that conversation is in a dark and damp bar. There's other places to have that dialogue. So I think a big part of it's also the setting, making these posts more welcoming, and also trying to actively change the way that they market themselves, and quite frankly, market themselves at all. One other criticism I heard was like, we want to know they exist for one thing. We want to see what they're doing with the community. They're not active online. They're not posting necessarily what they're doing when they're doing a blood drive or a scholarship competition, etc. They want to see that sense in the community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that I've always felt with VFW, the people who go into VFWs and American Legions are the veteran hat people, right? Like
Yes,
the
yeah.
dudes that wear like the Vietnam War vet or Korean War, or they have like the ship that they served on or something, and like current vets. Whenever I see somebody wearing an OEF or an OIF hat, I just really want to go snatch it off of their head. Like, but but I obviously like having something like that is its own like form of therapy, whether good or bad. But like, our generation doesn't really have, I don't know, like as you said, like there was saying well, our war was tougher than your war. Like your war lasted a year for you. You deployed, you came home, you were drafted, or you joined, on your own to, because you were going to be drafted or whatever. You wanted to pick your job. You did the thing, and then you came home, and and in the end, the war was lost. And you kind of have this, you're adrift at that point. Like, who do you talk to? What do you do? And I think the VFW and American Legions are good places for people like that to congregate and have that shared experience. But like, veterans now don't want to do that. Like, veterans, some of the ones that I talk to, they want to They want to do charity stuff. They want to, like as you said, blood drives, neighborhood cleanups, things like that. Things that gets them out and says, "Look, we're here. Here's what we're doing. You should come and be a part of this too." And if you're not coming to be a part of this, then we want you to know that you can be. We want you to know this is a welcome place, even if you're not ready for it now. You might be ready for it later. And that's where I feel like the real marketing is going to be, is not in come on by, we have cheap booze and we've got a chicken wing night. It's going to be, come on by, you can give back to your community. And maybe the current vets, like, they don't want that, and maybe there is maybe there is definitely a massive culture swing that needs to happen inside of VFWs. But the problem is going to be, how many VFW posts are there? Like 2,000, 3,000 throughout the United States?
I believe so. I get my
Yeah.
numbers right here. Yeah, I think it's so the American Legion, we were looking at around like, just over like 12,000 posts. And when they say posts, those are both, you can have a post without having like a physical building.
Right.
Like they can, have a group that just meets together and such. And then for the VFW, I mean, they were looking at, I think, 2 million members right now. But they're also seeing a pretty sharp decline as well in posts as well. But yeah, there's about 2,000 or so
Mhm.
VFW posts.
Yeah, and so what that's going to require is, if we're gonna even consider like half of those as places that need massive cultural shifts, and I know half is a very conservative number on that. It's probably way higher than that, but that's going to require like a coordinated effort behind 9/11 post 9/11 veterans. And I don't think we care for it. Like,
Mhm.
it's a place that has never it you know it they don't necessarily want us. That's how it feels. They don't want us. They don't reach out to us, whether that's on purpose or because they just don't know how to. But like any kind of reformation in these things is going to require a huge grassroots movement. And I really don't think, like, one, I don't think there's enough of us. I mean, we weren't drafted. We and
Right.
people served multiple deployments over 20 years. Like, this war lasted 20 years, yes, but we didn't have necessarily the massive troop numbers that were going in and out of Vietnam. We didn't have massive amounts of draftees who were being either taken over there or just doing logistical support here in the United States. There is just like a smaller veteran community as is, because we remained a all volunteer force, and not only like volunteer people to join, but people who stayed in and did 2 deployments, 3 deployments, 6 deployments, in some cases 10 deployments, like 10 years of deployment. Like, it's and when I hear that, and then I think of some Vietnam vets saying like, our war was harder than yours. Like, look, man, I had a Burger King, to be fair, but like, I spent 2 years away from family in 2 different countries fighting 2 different wars, and we lost both of them. So don't worry, I'm twice as much as you. I've been in 2 wars and lost both of them, and you've only been in one and lost it. So it
Yeah. You bring
technically
up a
you
great
should get
point.
out, because I'm the king shit here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, you bring up a really good point. And I think also, going off of that as well, I mean, the national organization, also both of the organizations like to point to the pool of eligible members as well is what's leading to their membership decline. So the fact, like the VFW, right? I mean, kind of the nature of deployments has changed. So they feel like, okay, America in general is making fewer veterans. And that's kind of their argument too, is that our pool of eligible members is declining. But the point is that you would also hope that, okay, so if let's say that the smaller portion of the American population would not be eligible for membership in the VFW or American Legion because fewer are serving, wouldn't you want to be as welcoming as possible to every veteran that comes out of the military? I mean, the VFW and American Legion are the Pepsi and Coca-Cola of veteran service organizations. They're long established brands that have been there for a very long time. And so if your customer base, if you will, is dwindling in some nature, wouldn't you want to be as welcoming as possible to every single person who's leaving? So I think that's interesting that that was one of the arguments that they relied on for, like, well, of course membership's declining, like there's fewer veterans. Well, then every veteran who leaves the service, if I was the VFW or the American Legion nationally, I would be trying to be as welcoming and change the culture in a way that welcomes this younger generation of veteran in, you know?
Now, I do have a question about like kind of how leadership works in the VFW, because I know that like individual posts have individual post commanders and everything, and they kind of fall underneath the national, which falls underneath the regional, that falls underneath the national. But are these is these posts, as we talked about, are hit or miss depending on which post you go to. Some of them are great. For the most part, though, people say that they're not, that they're pretty terrible. But like, would some kind of like nationalizing, like VFW comes down and says, like, look, this is what you're going to do. This is the we're going to give everybody a playbook on here's how you get people to join. Turn off, you know, t- turn Fox News off. Put and not put on CNN, but just like turn the TVs off. Like make it a place where you can have a real conversation. Maybe don't talk about politics. Like when my wife and I were kicking around the idea of like, would we want to like take over VFW? Would we want to build something of our own, start our own post? And what one of it really comes down to is what do people want? And I don't know. And so I want to get people together and say, what do you want? But I want to get them together somewhere where it's like, hey, you guys can go get a coffee over here, you can go get a beer there if you want, you can get some food here if you want, and we can have these conversations and we can figure out what it is that we all want out of a group here. And let's make it not political, let's make it aggressively inclusive. Like, you're a veteran, you have a DD-214, I don't care what you look like, you're one of us, you're going to be a part of us. And as long as you're not an asshole to everybody else, fine. Like, I want you here. I want people to feel like not only welcome but engaged in what's going on, and bringing other people in. And hey, if that alienates all the VFW guys and they want to be cranky in their bar, that's fine. But I do think that there's something important that we're missing out on right now. And COVID has not helped it out. But pandemics don't last forever, and eventually people like me are really going to start hurting for, or people in my generation are really going to start hurting for a place to go. And I mourn the fact that we don't have that, and I mourn the fact that people will tell me that one of the veterans who replied is ethnically Korean, and guess how well that goes over with fucking Korean War veterans. When like a Korean veteran walks in and is like, hey, I'm Korean. I not even just like, hey, I'm Korean, but walking in and looking Asian, and then having Vietnam or Korean War veterans look at you like, that doesn't go over very well. Because and we can fault them or whatever, but it's just it's not always going to be a welcoming kind of solution. So I really think that like maybe it doesn't need to be a nationalized thing. Maybe it's just kind of a, hey, why don't you just try to reach out and find some veterans to get together and do a thing. um and that's a hard direction to go in, because like, well, how do you meet veterans? How do you find them in your area, your location? Like, I live in South City, I don't know who's a veteran around me. Am I supposed to go knocking on doors, say, hey, did you serve? Do you want to come hang out at this place where we're gonna have a meeting? So I'm were there any kind of suggestions on like not just stop being assholes to everybody, but here's how to do outreach programs? Did anybody kind of give you a here's how I would like to see this happen?
Sure. No, sadly, I mean, I think you bring up a good point that, like, let's say, that there was more of like a nationalization in terms of the structure and guidance and rules of uh, controlling all those VFW or American Legion posts. I can tell you that there would be immediate pushback, right? I mean, like the infringement on, the post governance would be, I mean, probably akin to, some form of tyranny to a lot of these veterans. I mean, they'd probably be upset over such a thing. Um, at least the ones that are in these posts that we're talking about that are kind of, less likely to change. And one thing we've seen is just that, right? Is that we've seen what I've seen as a discourse online and got some reader mail about was just younger veterans saying like, "Hey, let's just take this place over. Let's all join. Let's all hang out. Let's just make it our spot." And the problem with that is some of the headwinds that they've faced in that process, right? Is just kind of first the initial awkwardness, right, of having those culture and generational divides clash. So that's one part of it. But a lot of them said it just takes time, and some have even joined VFW posts that are maybe even farther away from where they live because maybe they are less populated and they feel like they can bring their group of veterans and hang out there and be more active members there, for example. That's one solution that we've seen. Um, you know, I think ultimately what it's come down to is just, and sadly with a lot of things, right, is these younger generation of veterans are like, look, it's going to be awkward. Like you're going to go in, it's going to feel a little weird at times. You might get some, not great comments or great commentary from those talking about whatever conflict you served in, or maybe even your political leanings or your background or your identity. But stick with it, and eventually that place will become yours. Because it's true. I mean, there is an older generation of veteran that is passing away, and that in order to survive, that it is going to take these younger veterans to trickle into this organization. The question is then, right, is that like change is coming for every single one of these posts. The times are changing. So are you willing to accept that change and accept these younger generation of vets in so that they can hopefully strengthen and continue your organization that you worked so hard to build? Or you can ignore them, So I think a lot of younger veterans also see it as a waiting game in part too, that, eventually their time will come where they can run a local post, and that maybe then they can start to see some of this culture shift. But like I said, this is something where the problem has gotten more severe, but it's a problem that's existed for a very long time. I mean, since World War II veterans were running their local halls and posts, not being welcoming to Vietnam vets. And then with time, I mean, now Vietnam vets are running the show.
Yeah, and I would love to see that. I don't know if my generation of veteran really wants to do that. I'd be interested in it. Like I said, I've been kicking around the idea of just having my own little thing, and I feel like that's more of what veterans are doing, is they're just creating a space for themselves and inviting whoever they want, or whoever wants to join into it. Thomas, I have one more question for you before we wrap this up. All right, have you seen the movie VFW, the 2019 Fangoria movie?
No, I haven't, but it's going on my watch list right now.
Yes, if you enjoy bloody horror movies with a bunch of washed up actors, you're gonna love it. It's got Fred Williamson in it, as he's the main guy. He's like their biggest star, and I guess Stephen Lang as well. But highly recommend. Part of your VFW reconnaissance and everything is to go into a VFW and show them this movie and say, why can't you guys kill vampires this badass? All right.
It is the perfect setting for a horror movie too.
Exactly.
Honestly.
It's perfect too, because it's a lot of low lights, real cheap backing. I'm sure they like rented out an actual VFW, and it's like, do you guys mind if we dump a bunch of fake blood all over the place? Like, yeah, sure, whatever, bring it on.
Make sure it's cleaned up by the fish fry. That's their only requirement.
We got drains in the floor. Just squeegee that shit on down. We'll be fine.
That's great. I'll check that out.
Thomas, where can people find you online?
You can find me at military.com. I mostly cover the Air Force and Space Force, but also cover broader military issues. You can also find me on Twitter at Tom Novelli.
Yeah, we'll definitely bring you on to shit talk the Space Force for some more, or at least I'm going to, and you can defend them. Something that I like to make. I like to make people do. I made somebody defend the F-35 at me one time.
Oh wow, that's a wild. That's a wild ride.
You know what? They convinced me a little bit. Anyway, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.